On October 14, 2011, a British executive named Michael Woodford walked out of Olympus headquarters in Tokyo with a small suitcase and a stack of internal documents. He had just been fired by a unanimous board vote. 2 weeks earlier, he had become CEO of one of Japan's most respected companies, the first non-Japanese person ever to run a major Japanese firm. His crime was simple. He had asked in writing why Olympus had paid $687 million in advisory fees on a single deal. The answer to that question was almost $2 billion, 20 years old, and buried in offshore shell companies. Sinister business, bankrupt empire. To understand what Woodford had found, you have to understand what Olympus had become. The company was founded in Tokyo in 1919, originally to make microscopes. By the 1930s, it was making cameras. By the 1950s, it had invented the world's first commercially produced flexible medical endoscope. That product made it untouchable. Today, Olympus controls roughly 70% of the global market for the endoscopes used in colonoscopies and stomach exams. A camera company in name. A medical monopoly, in fact. Through the 1980s, Olympus rode the Japanese economic miracle to the top. Its cameras were in every department store. Its endoscopes were in every major hospital in the world. Its stock price climbed. Its executives were celebrated. Its books were spotless. Or they appeared to be. Because in the late 1980s, like nearly every Japanese corporation of that era, Olympus had begun to do something quietly disastrous with its cash. Japanese companies, flush with profits, were not just selling products. They were also speculating heavily on bonds and exotic financial instruments. Olympus was one of the most aggressive. When the Japanese asset bubble burst at the start of the 1990s, those investments collapsed. By 1995, Olympus was sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars in losses from bad financial bets that had nothing to do with cameras or endoscopes. In any Western company, those losses would have hit the balance sheet immediately. In Japan, there was another option. It was called Tobashi. Tobashi, literally translated, means to make fly away. It is the practice of selling a loss-making asset to a friendly third party at its original book value before the loss has to be recognized. The third party agrees, on a handshake, to hand the loss back later, after corporate cleanup. Tobashi is illegal in Japan. It was also, throughout the 1990s, common practice across Japanese corporate finance. Olympus moved its losses, by the hundreds of millions of dollars, into offshore funds set up by friendly investment advisors in the Cayman Islands, in Singapore, and in Hong Kong. The hidden losses now lived on someone else's balance sheet. But Olympus still owed the money. The friendly third parties wanted their cash back, with interest, so the company needed a way to quietly pump money out to the offshore funds, in a way that would look to its auditors and to the public like a normal business expense. The mechanism they chose was mergers and acquisitions, specifically the advisory fees on mergers and acquisitions. The advisors who ran the offshore funds were a small group of Japanese financial fixers operating out of Hong Kong and the Cayman Islands, names like Hayakawa, Yamada. Their firms were obscure even within finance. 2 of the men involved had, according to later Japanese investigations and the FBI, suspected ties to the Yakuza, to the Japanese organized crime syndicates. None of this was visible from the published Olympus financial statements. From the outside, it just looked like the company was doing big, expensive global deals. By 2006, the hidden loss balance, with interest and fees layered on top, had grown to roughly $1.5 billion. Olympus could not write it down without explaining it. So it kept moving the loss forward, year after year, hoping the camera and endoscope businesses would eventually generate enough profit to absorb it quietly. The hole was now older than some of the executives running the company. 2008 was the year Olympus fired the cannon. The company announced it was acquiring a small British medical device maker called Gyrus for about $2 billion. Gyrus was a real company. The deal was real. The advisory fee was not. Olympus paid $687 million to two Cayman Island shell companies that no major bank had ever heard of. The largest single M&A advisory fee in the history of corporate finance, paid to companies nobody could identify by a Japanese camera maker. Olympus also bought three tiny, unrelated Japanese companies that year. One made microwave dinner plates, one made face cream, one made plastic kitchen containers. Combined, they had revenues of about $10 million a year and no track record of profit. Olympus paid $773 million for them. Within months, the company wrote down nearly the entire value, declaring them unexpectedly worthless. The money was now gone from the parents' books. It had also vanished into the offshore funds that had held the old losses for 20 years. Olympus's auditors, KPMG AZSA, raised a private alarm. They flagged the unusual fees and the impairments. The Olympus board responded by replacing the auditors with Ernst & Young, who signed the books without objection. The internal accountant at Olympus, who had also raised concerns, was quietly transferred to a position with no responsibilities. The cover-up was now operating in broad daylight. And then, in early 2011, Olympus made a decision that would unwind everything. Michael Woodford was a 30-year veteran of Olympus. A working-class Englishman from Liverpool, he had joined the company's European medical device division in 1981 as a sales rep selling endoscopes to hospitals. Over 3 decades, he had become the most successful executive in Olympus's European operations. The company's chairman, Tsuyoshi Kikukawa, was a fan. In April of 2011, Kikukawa gave Woodford the keys. He was promoted to president of Olympus Corporation, the first foreigner ever to hold that position. The Japanese business press treated it as a sign of new openness. 6 months later, on October 1st, 2011, Kikukawa promoted Woodford again. Now he was chief executive officer as well as president. Full operational control. The first non-Japanese CEO in the history of Olympus Corporation. The board voted unanimously. The Japanese newspapers wrote celebratory profiles. Olympus had a new face, a Liverpudlian face. He held the job for exactly 14 days. In July of that year, a small Japanese investigative magazine called Facta had published an article that almost no one in Japan paid attention to. The article asked a single, simple question. Why had Olympus paid $687 million in M&A advisory fees on a $2 billion acquisition? The Japanese mainstream press did not pick the story up. The Olympus board did not address it. But Woodford, on a layover at Heathrow in late September, read the English-language translation. He started asking around. Then he started writing memos. Over the first 2 weeks of October, Woodford wrote 6 letters to Chairman Kikukawa. He asked for documents. He asked for the names of the Cayman Islands advisors. He asked for the rationale on the 3 domestic acquisitions. Each letter went unanswered. He commissioned an independent report from PricewaterhouseCoopers in London, which concluded that the Gyrus advisory fees were almost certainly a vehicle for moving money out of Olympus to undisclosed third parties. He took the PwC report to the Olympus board. He demanded that Kikukawa explain or resign. On October 14th, the Olympus board met in Tokyo. The first item of business was the firing of Michael Woodford for, in their words, his inability to understand Japanese culture and his confrontational style. The vote was unanimous. Every Japanese board member, including the ones Woodford had spent years working with, voted to remove him. He was given no severance. His Tokyo apartment access was revoked the same hour. His company driver was reassigned. He was told, politely, to take a taxi to the airport. Woodford did take that taxi, but before he got on the plane to London, he made copies of every relevant document he had access to and tucked them into his carry-on. He also called a friend at the Financial Times in London. By the time he landed at Heathrow 11 hours later, he had agreed to give the paper the entire story. The Olympus board, sitting in Tokyo, believed they had just buried a problem. In fact, they had just handed it a megaphone. The Financial Times broke the story on October 18, 2011. 4 days later, the Wall Street Journal. 2 days after that, the New York Times. The Olympus stock began to fall. It kept falling. Within 3 weeks, the company's share price had lost about 80% of its value. About $7 billion of market capitalization, gone. The Japanese newspapers, who had spent the spring writing celebratory profiles of Woodford, now wrote outraged editorials about the rude foreigner who would not shut up. Then the Japanese police began to investigate. An independent committee chaired by a former Japanese Supreme Court judge was appointed by Olympus itself to control the damage. The committee delivered its report in December. Olympus executives, working with a network of obscure Cayman Islands and Singaporean advisors, had concealed approximately $1.7 billion in losses dating to the early 1990s. The committee's chair described Olympus management as, quote, rotten to the core. He did not use the word Yakuza. The American FBI, separately investigating the dollar flow, did. In 2012, Japanese police arrested Chairman Kikukawa, 2 former Olympus executives, and 3 of the financial advisors who had run the offshore funds. In 2013, they were all convicted in Tokyo of falsifying financial statements, the most serious charge a Japanese executive can face. The sentences were 3 years in prison, all suspended. None of the Olympus executives served a day. The Yakuza allegations were never formally tested in Japanese court. The investigation was quietly closed. Olympus survived. It exited the camera business in 2020 and now operates almost exclusively as a medical devices company, which is also its most profitable arm. Michael Woodford never worked in Japanese business again. He wrote a book about the experience titled Exposure, which became an international bestseller. He won an unfair dismissal lawsuit against Olympus in London for £10 million. The Japanese establishment closed ranks. He has not been back to Tokyo. And the camera company that hid a $2 billion hole still controls the endoscopes used in 7 out of every 10 colonoscopies in the world. Bankrupt empire. Sinister business. The dark side of business. Subscribe.